the spring of 1453, many historians agree that the Middle Ages came to a violent end. It happened outside the walls of Constantinople, which for 1,000 years had served as the unbreachable shield of Christian Europe. These walls were thick, tall, and supposedly indestructible, having broken the armies of kings for centuries. But that morning, the defenders on the wall heard a sound they had never heard before, a thunderclap so loud it shook the fillings in their teeth. It was the roar of the basilica cannon, a weapon the size of a dragon capable of casting stone balls weighing 1,000 pounds. When the smoke finally cleared, the ancient walls were gone, and pouring through the gap were the elite soldiers of a new superpower, the Ottomans. When they took the city, they didn't just conquer territory. They took the title of Rome itself. The Sultan rode his white horse into the Hagia Sophia and declared himself the Caesar of Rome. History often paints the Ottomans as just another Middle Eastern kingdom, but that overlooks a fundamental reality. At its peak, this was a European power that sat on the throne of the Caesars. It was a bridge that connected the East and the West, a machine of war that forced Europe to find America, and a civilization where a shepherd could become the most powerful man on earth while a slave woman could rule the empire. To understand how they ruled the world for 600 years, we have to look past the silk and the spices. We have to look at the blood tax, the coffee houses, and the golden cage of the Harem to see what life was really like inside the Sublime Porte. To understand the genius of the Ottoman Empire, you first have to understand its biggest problem. How do you rule an empire where the majority of your subjects are Christian, but the rulers are Muslim? The Ottoman solution was brutal, yet brilliant. It was called the Devshirme, or the Gathering. Every few years, Ottoman officers would march into the Christian villages of the Balkans. However, they weren't looking for gold or grain. They were looking for boys. This was a tax paid in flesh. They would take the strongest, smartest, and best-looking boys between the ages of 8 and 20. For the parents, this was a nightmare, as they were losing their children forever. But for the boys, it was the start of a strange and powerful destiny. They were taken to Istanbul, converted to Islam, and put into the most rigorous school in the world. They were stripped of their old family names and given a new loyalty, meaning their only family now was the Sultan himself. If a boy was strong, he became a janissary, a member of the first modern standing army in Europe. These were super soldiers who were forbidden to marry or trade because they lived and died for war. But if a boy was smart, he went to the palace school, where he studied Arabic, Persian, mathematics, and calligraphy. This created a meritocracy that terrified Europe. In England or France, to be a general or a minister, you had to be born a duke with blue blood. In the Ottoman Empire, nobody cared who your father was. You could be the son of a pig farmer in Serbia, but if you had the talent, you could become the Grand Vizier, the second most powerful man in the world. The empire was run by men who had been slaves, which meant the government was filled with the most capable minds rather than the most noble bloodlines. While the janissaries were expanding the borders, life in the capital, Istanbul, was becoming a legend. In the 16th century, this was the center of the world. While London was a muddy backwater and Paris was tearing itself apart with religious wars, Istanbul was a beacon of civilization. The streets smelled of roasting meat, spices from India, and something new that would eventually change the world: coffee. The Ottomans didn't invent coffee, but they perfected the culture of it. The first coffee houses appeared here, but these weren't just places to get caffeine. They were called schools of the wise. For the price of a cup of bitter black liquid, a stone mason could sit next to a poet and debate politics. They played chess, they gossiped, and they criticized the government. In fact, yes, they were so popular that the sultans occasionally tried to ban coffee, fearing that these caffeine-fueled debates would lead to rebellion. But the most striking thing about life in Istanbul was the tolerance. Europe at this time was deeply intolerant. If you were a Protestant in a Catholic country, you were burned, and if you were a Jew in Spain, you were expelled. The Ottomans operated differently, using the millet system. This system allowed religious minorities to have their own mini-governments. If you were an Orthodox Christian, you were judged by Christian laws, and if you were Jewish, you went to a Jewish court. As long as you paid your taxes and didn't cause trouble, the Sultan didn't care how you prayed. When Spain kicked out its Jewish population in 1492, so the Sultan Bayezid II sent the Ottoman navy to save them. He famously mocked the King of Spain, saying, "You call Ferdinand a wise king? He impoverishes his own country and enriches mine." But there was one place in the empire where freedom did not exist: the harem. Western history has fetishized this place, imagining it as a pleasure den filled with beautiful women lounging on pillows. The reality was much colder. The harem was the political engine of the empire, and it was a brutal workplace. The women here were slaves, mostly captured from the Caucasus or Eastern Europe, but like the Devshirme boys, they had a path to power. If a woman caught the Sultan's eye and gave birth to a son, she stopped being a slave and became a queen. This period of history is often called the Sultanate of Women. Powerful mothers, known as the Valide Sultan, actually ran the empire from behind the scenes. They forged alliances, corresponded with Queen Elizabeth I of England, and directed the construction of massive mosques. But this power came with a terrible price. The Ottoman succession laws were written in blood. The sultans didn't believe in the European rule where the eldest son gets everything. In the Ottoman system, any son could become the sultan. This meant that when an old sultan died, a race began. The brothers would rush to the capital, and the first one to reach the throne and claim the treasury became the ruler. And his first official act? Murder. Under the Law of Fratricide, a new sultan was legally required to execute all his brothers. They believed it was better to kill 10 princes than to have a civil war that killed 10,000 peasants. When Sultan Mehmed III took the throne, 19 coffins left the palace the next morning. 19 of his brothers, some of them infants, were strangled with a silk cord. This was the dark heart of the empire, a stability bought with the blood of children. We often forget how much this empire shaped the world we live in today. The Ottomans sat squarely on the Silk Road, controlling the flow of spice, silk, and pepper from Asia to Europe, and they taxed it heavily. This monopoly terrified the Europeans because they couldn't afford to pay the Ottoman tax anymore. So the kings of Portugal and Spain looked at a map and got desperate. They decided to try something crazy. They decided to go around the Ottomans. This is the great irony of history. It was the power of the Ottoman Empire that forced Christopher Columbus to sail west and Vasco da Gama to sail south. You could argue that the Ottoman Empire is the reason America was discovered by Europeans, as their blockade forced the age of exploration. But their military reached even further. In 1529, and again in 1683, the Ottoman armies marched to the gates of Vienna in the heart of Europe. They failed to take the city, but they left a cultural mark. There is a popular legend that says, after the siege, the bakers of Vienna created a pastry in the shape of the crescent moon on the Ottoman flags to celebrate the victory. While food historians debate if this is the true origin of the croissant, the story persists for a reason. It symbolizes just how deeply the Ottoman threat was baked into the European psyche. Like all empires, the Ottomans eventually faded. They failed to industrialize, they stopped the meritocracy, and they let corruption rot the government. By the 19th century, they were called the sick man of Europe. When they finally collapsed after World War I, the victors, Britain and France, carved up the carcass of the empire. They drew straight lines on a map and created new countries like Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. We are still living in the wreckage of that collapse. The conflicts in the Middle East today are largely the result of the vacuum left when the Ottoman order disappeared. But the ghost of the empire is still with us. The Ottomans proved that a multi-ethnic, multi-religious empire could survive for 6 centuries. They showed that power could be based on talent rather than blood. They were the superpower that bridged the gap between the ancient world and the modern one, and for a long time, the sun rose and set on the shadow of the Sultan.